भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम् अद्वैतामृतवर्षिणीं भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनीम् अम्ब त्वामनुसन्दधामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणीम् नमोऽस्तु ते व्यासविशालबुद्धे पुल्लारविन्दायतपत्रनेत्र येन त्वया भारततैलपूर्णः प्रज्वालितो ज्ञानमयप्रदीपः प्रपन्नपारिजाताय स्तोत्रवेत्रैकपाणये ज्ञानमुद्राय कृष्णाय गीतामृतदुहे नमः। सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोग्धा गोपालनन्दनः पार्थो वत्सः सुधीर्भोक्ता दुग्धं गीतामृतं महत् वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुं यं ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्ररुद्रमरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यैस्तवैः वेदैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदैः गायन्ति यं सामगाः ध्यानावस्थिततद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनो यस्यान्तन्न विदुः सुरासुरगणाः देवाय तस्मै नमः।
Om Gurubhyo Namaha. We continue with chapter 4, Jnana Karma Sannyasa Yoga, the yoga of knowledge, of renunciation of action. Here is the essence of the verses 9 to 11, translation and commentary by Maharshi Ji. Janma karma cha me divyam evam yah vetti tatvatah tvattva deham punah janma nayeti mam yeti sah Arjuna. Next verse. Vitaraga bhayakrodhaah manmaya mam upasritaah bhava gnana tapasa puta madbhavam agatah. Next. Ye etha mam prapadyante tan tatha eva bhajami aham mama varta anuvartante manushya partha sarvasaha. Now here is the English translation. My birth and my activity are divine. He who knows this in very essence, on leaving the body, is not reborn. He comes to me, O Arjuna. Again, my birth and my activity are divine. He who knows this in very essence, on leaving the body, is not reborn. He comes to me, O Arjuna. Next, freed from attachment, fear and anger, absorbed in me, taking refuge in me, purified by the austerity of wisdom, many have come to my being. Next, as men approach me, so do I favor them in all ways. O Partha, men follow my path. Again, as men approach me, so do I favor them. In all ways, O Partha, men follow my path. Now let's go back to verse 8 where we left off. To protect the righteous and destroy the wicked, to establish dharma firmly, I take birth age after age. Here Bhagavan clearly states his main purpose for taking an incarnation or the avatar is to satisfy and protect the righteous. He comes to earth moved by the righteous, for the love of the righteous, for the fulfillment of the righteous, and to come on earth in order to give his love to his devotees is the greatest joy for Almighty God. He comes on earth and the light comes. It brings extinction to the darkness of ignorance and destruction of the wicked. The equilibrium in nature is restored, the forces of evolution become stronger, and dharma becomes firmly established in the world. So again, the purpose of the avatar is to protect the righteous and destroy the wicked. Now let's come to verse number 9 of today's discourse. Bhagavan is saying, my birth and my activity are divine. He who knows this in very essence, on leaving the body, is not reborn. He comes to me, O Arjuna. Again, my birth and my activity are divine. He who knows this in very essence, on leaving the body, is not reborn. He comes to me, O Arjuna. In order to understand the divine birth and the activity of the divine incarnation, man has to rise to the state of divinity. Again, in order to understand the divine birth and the activity of the divine incarnation, man has to rise to the state of divinity. Having risen to this state, having become established in the eternal being of the Absolute, he rises above the bondage of time, space, and causation. For him, there is no question of birth or death. He has life eternally, and he has it in the timeless, unbounded omnipresence of the Lord. His life is his life. Here, his life means God's life. That means the individual life is in God's life. He comes to me, says the Lord. And further, Bhagavan says, there is no question of his rebirth in the world. Now let us look at these 2 points Bhagavan has mentioned. He said, my birth and my activity are divine. When he refers to my birth, the birth of Bhagavan is not the same as the birth of a human. It is divine in the sense that he, the divine, ever remaining in his cosmic state of transcendental being, takes a body and comes on earth. The divine birth needs no period of transition and involves no process of physical birth. The divine being does not become non-divine and non-being. Remaining divine and remaining being, he appears as man to save human life on earth and re-establish the path of righteousness. So again, try to understand that the divine remaining in his cosmic state of the transcendental being, he takes a body, and this birth needs no transition and does not involve the process of physical birth. The divine being does not become non-divine and non-being, and he remains divine and remains as being. And remaining divine and remaining being, he appears as man to save human life on earth and re-establish the path of righteousness. And now coming to God's Bhagavan saying, my activity. When he says my birth and my activity are divine, we talked about my birth, and now let's come to my activity. The unmanifest transcendental divine, assuming human form, remains in his divine nature and he acts. The divine nature is all being, eternal, unchanging and non-active, even though it is the infinite source of life energy. Because Bhagavan acts while remaining in his divine nature, his actions are also divine. So we come to the finality that in order to understand the divine birth and the activity of the divine incarnation, man has to rise to the state of divinity. And now when we look at the next statement of Bhagavan, where he says, he who knows this in very essence on leaving the body is not reborn. So it is very clear that you cannot understand the divine birth and the activity of the divine incarnation in this present consciousness. So you have to rise to the state of the divine in order to state of divinity or the God consciousness in order to fully understand this divine birth and the activity of this incarnation. So when you rise to this state and become established in the eternal being of the Absolute, then one rises above the bondage of time, space and causation. So here Bhagavan says so beautifully, he has life eternally. That means he has become immortal, and he has it in the timeless, unbounded omnipresence of the Lord. That means he is one with the Bhagavan, and his life is in his life. That means this individual life is in God's life, and he comes to me. Then how can there be any question of a rebirth to such a person? Now let's move forward to the next verse. Bhagavan says, freed from attachment, fear and anger, absorbed in me, taking refuge in me, purified by the austerity of wisdom, many have come to my being. Again, freed from attachment, fear and anger, absorbed in me, taking refuge in me, purified by the austerity of wisdom, many have come to my being. Here, the sequence of expressions is highly significant. Now, let's go over with one after the other. Freed from attachment, fear and anger is a prerequisite to be absorbed in me. Again, freed from attachment, fear and anger is a prerequisite to be absorbed in me. Here, attachment, fear and anger find fertile ground in the soil of ignorance. And what is this soil of ignorance? Where the self has not discovered its meaning in the self. That means one is not self-realized. So this becomes a fertile ground in the soil of ignorance. And here, attachment, fear and anger find this fertile ground in the soil of ignorance. And how to rise above this ignorance? Transcendental meditation takes the mind to the field of bliss consciousness, supreme contentment and infinite energy, leaving no room for any kind of weakness. When the mind transcends and it reaches the state of being, which forms the basis of God consciousness, again, the state of being or the transcendent forms the basis of God consciousness, and this is expressed in the words absorbed in me and taking refuge in me. So the only way to rise above this ignorance is to rise in consciousness and to know the transcendental self, and which is the basis of the God consciousness. So this fulfills what Bhagavan is saying. Freed from attachment, fear and anger is a prerequisite to be absorbed in me. Next he says, taking refuge in me, purified by the austerity of wisdom, many have come to my being. Let us look at what Bhagavan means by purified by the austerity of wisdom. Austerity means denial of the pleasures of the senses or coming out of the field of sensory activity and enjoyment. Again, austerity means denial of the pleasures of the senses or coming out of the field of sensory activity and enjoyment. The purpose of austerity is to purify by freeing the mind from the impact of the objects of sense. Likewise, knowledge separates the self from the whole field of activity. This is the significance of the expression austerity of wisdom. However, it should not be understood to mean that as the practice of austerity involves hardship. So again, the practice of austerity is not about involving hardship, nor is the path of knowledge involving hardship. On the contrary, Gaining knowledge is joyful from beginning to end. From the state of transcendental consciousness through cosmic consciousness to God consciousness, it should be joyful. As the mind proceeds towards the transcendent, it becomes more and more free from the gross fields of experience, and this brings it nearer and nearer to a state of purity. Eventually, when the mind transcends the subtlest state of experience, it is left to itself, and then it reaches the state of absolute purity. Again, Bhagavan is saying that this state of absolute purity gained during transcendental consciousness, which is the Turiya, it becomes permanent in cosmic consciousness and finds its purpose and consummation in the state of purity born of knowledge of the ultimate oneness in life in God consciousness. In this state of knowledge, in this state of oneness of life in God consciousness, man finds that union with God of which Bhagavan says, "Many have come to my being." And so this is the expression Bhagavan uses when he says, "Many have come to my being," is man finding union with God. And by using the word many, Bhagavan extends the hope of union with God to any man. Now, having described the direct way of attaining the ultimate knowledge in God consciousness, Bhagavan in the next verse speaks about his reaction to the method of approach adopted by the seeker. Bhagavan continues, "As men approach me, so do I favor them. In all ways, O Partha, men follow my path." Again, "As men approach me, so do I favor them. In all ways, O Partha, men follow my path." When Bhagavan says, "In all ways, O Partha, men follow my path," this has different meaning at different levels. First, the nature of man is like the nature of God in that man behaves to others as others behave to him. Again, the nature of God and the nature of man in terms of behavior with others are similar. When Bhagavan says, "As men approach me, so do I favor them," it is an established natural law that action and reaction are equal to one another. In the fullness of divinity, God is ever full, and He is like the water of a great lake where this fullness remains. Here in this great lake, the water has a tendency neither to flow away nor to resist flowing. It just remains as it is. Now, if a farmer wants to take water to his field, he brings a pipe and puts it at the level of the water. The water does not refuse to flow once the pipe is raised to its level. So again, as men approach me, so do I favor them. So if one can rise to the level of the divinity, one can rise in consciousness to God consciousness, then you attain God in completion. Now, secondly, it is important to know that the nature of the Lord Bhagavan is such that he himself does not take any initiative and that he only responds. This is very important to understand because Bhagavan himself does not take any initiative and he only responds. In this sense, Bhagavan is impartial and he is just a witness. So, in order to derive the maximum benefit from Bhagavan, one has to completely surrender to him. And this can happen through the transcendence during meditation, which is the direct way to God consciousness. Again, one who reaches this stage, truly losing his limited identity, gains the status of unbounded eternal being in God consciousness. Here it is important to understand that Bhagavan's purpose in disclosing this essential characteristic of his nature is that all men should reach this state of divine existence. Here is the exposition of a technique by which the limited personality of a man is enabled to rise to the unlimited status of eternal existence in God consciousness. And this is open for all. Again, try to understand, as men approach me, so do I favor them. In all ways, O Partha, men follow my path. And here again, Bhagavan is trying to explain what is his path. What is the path that men can follow? Here, the natural tendency of every man is to turn towards greater happiness, and therefore to proceed towards the eternal happiness of God consciousness is following my path which God is describing. Finally, in all ways, when Bhagavan says, in all ways, O Partha, men follow my path, indicates that God's own consciousness is the sole guiding factor of man's consciousness. It underlies all life in the cosmos and is the basic motivating intelligence of all beings. Here, cosmic intelligence upholds man's intelligence. Again, Bhagavan's God consciousness, that means Bhagavan's own consciousness, underlies all of life in the cosmos and is the basic motivative intelligence of all beings. And so Bhagavan is saying, my own consciousness is the sole guiding factor of man's consciousness. And here the cosmic intelligence is upholding the man's intelligence. Here ends the essence of these verses 9 to 11, chapter 4, Gnana Karma Sannyasa Yoga, the yoga of knowledge, of renunciation, of action. Translation and commentary by Maharishi Ji. Now let me add a few words. Maharishi would always remind that Vedic tradition belongs to those much higher levels of consciousness. The Vedic tradition is coming out from the total knowledge, and it is the natural law, and it is the very dharma. So in this dharma, in this Vedic knowledge, we are again and again reminded to rise above our normal waking, dreaming and sleeping states of consciousness to higher states of consciousness and gain this God consciousness and beyond. We know the strength of everyone is the Atma, the inner Atma. Our Atma or the Self is the source of everything, but Atma can only behave through the body. Because this Atma or the Self is in every being. The tiger has an Atma, and the Atma of the tiger is the same as the Atma of anyone else. But the body and the behavior and the patterns are different with each being. It's different in the animals and it's different in the human beings. And so this Atma or Self is only capable of functioning from the house that he lives in. Here, Maharshiji once said that a human physiology has the ability to take a high jump or get into a helicopter and fly up straight, take a lift up straight away. The human physiology and the human body is designed in such a way that it can take you, it can elevate you to the supreme authority. And here the supreme authority means naturalness using total natural law through thought only. So again, it is through thought only that you can rise to the state of the supreme authority. And this is why the human body has been declared to be a place of moksha, the freedom. Here one has the ability to be remaining within the body and still feel unbounded and unrestricted while remaining within the body. And this is only by the virtue of raising the consciousness. Here, I want to take a minute to remind all of you that the most important thing is to bring your own individual transformation. We cannot hope to transform society without bringing the individual transformation. And each devotee is truly unique. Being a physician, I understand this very clearly, where we used to say each patient or client is unique and different. So in the same way, each devotee is different and unique, and one has to address the concerns and seek the guidance and the knowledge as to one's requirements. Bhagavan and the Gurus give what you want. It is up to you what you desire. If you just want simple desires, materialistic desires, then those get granted. But if you want moksha, freedom, then that also will be granted. But you have to rise yourself to the level of the divinity. An avatar happens out of love and compassion, and the greatness of Bhagavan Krishna or God is that he gives you the freedom to be in bondage. You have the ultimate freedom and you have the ultimate choice whether you want to remain in bondage or you want to be free from the bondage. This is your choice. So here when Bhagavan is saying that it is important to be free from the attachments born out of anger and fear, and then you can experience union with him or be absorbed in him, and you attain him. So when Bhagavan says Vitaraga Bhaya Krodha, that means be free from fear and anger and do not create bonds. He is reminding that to rise out of the greed and discontentment and rise in the above the actions which are self-centered, and also rise above the desires which are also individual and self-centered. And then Krishna is giving the complete knowledge and the techniques as to how to cut these karmic bonds and to completely come to self-realization. And when he says Manmaya Mam Uparsitaha, that means rise up to the status of me, then you will have no anger and no fear, and all actions will be without bondage. And he repeatedly gives the assurance that having followed this path, many people in the past have achieved self-realization and God realization. Now I want to take a few minutes to bring the understanding of how karma of meditation can relieve one from all the binding effects of karma. Here, when we are talking about transcendental meditation, it is also a karma. So meditation is also an action. And let us see how the action of meditation can relieve us from all suffering and all bondage. Again, when one rises to eternal life, that is the cosmic consciousness, then the whole field of karma or the actions has come to perfection. All that for which karma was meant is understood that it is for evolution. So in this context, then one understands the desire also. So desire is there, desire is always there, and desire gives rise to action. But when the desires are meant to be for evolution, to become more than what you are, to enjoy more than what you have at present, and to become perfect than what you are at present, then the nature of the desires change, and when the perfection is reached, no more desire is possible. Here when you say no more desire, it means no more of the individual desires. They will be just desires to help fulfilling the needs of the world and to bring evolution for others. Now here, it is important to understand the range of karma. If the karma is done by the mind, which is not eternally contented, then that karma will sow a seed for the future karma. Please try to understand this. When the karma sows a seed for future karma, means when the action leaves an impression of its value, then this impression is the seed for the future action. So the present action is sowing a seed for the future action, and this is the binding influence of action. So it is important now for the mind to rise to a state of contentment, to a state of bliss. Again, every action that we do binds us. It binds us to do that action or a related action again and again. And so this continues. the actions are performed again and again, and every action is binding us. But when the mind rises to that height of experience of bliss, where the impressions of the karma will not leave a permanent impression. These impressions will only leave a line like on a water, a very faint expression. Then the man is said to be rising above the influence of karma, which in essence is rising above the binding influence of action. Here it is important to understand further that the action and the fruit of the action will be there. Again, the action and the fruit of the action will be there, but that will not be able to bind us for the cycle of action and impression and desire, that will not bind us for the cycle of birth and death. So again, it relieves one from the cycle of this action, then leaving an impression and having another desire, and creating this cycle of action, impression and desire, and which becomes the binding cycle for birth and death will not be there. This then will relieve one from the greatest miseries of life and also from the small miseries of life. Now again, let's take a step back and look at the desires. We have understood that when one reaches the perfection, then no more desire is possible. No more desire is possible is one thing, and no more impressions of the experiences are also possible. These impressions again are like faint impressions, like a line drawn on water. Here it is important to understand that even a realized man can have these faint impressions. When he sees the flower, when a realized man sees the flower is seen. It goes through the retina of the eyes, the flower, and one cannot say that there is no impression at all. The impression is there, but the impression is not an impression of a line on stone, which is difficult to be erased. It is just like an impression on water. It is seen and drawn and erased simultaneously. So, in order to rise above this binding action of the karma, above the attachment for the fruit of the results, the fruit of karma, we understand that we have to meditate, we have to transcend. So again, we understand meditation is also a karma, and meditation is also an action. But when all actions begin to bind us, we break the chain of that binding by some action. Again, when all actions begin to bind us, we break the chain of that binding by some action. For example, when a thorn gets to the finger, we need another thorn to take it out. So, the action of meditation is an action which relieves us from all suffering and all bondage. All other actions other than meditation are such which bind us for all suffering and all misery in life. But by using this karma of meditation, then we can relieve this binding effect of karma. And again, we break the chain of that binding by an action called meditation. Finally, let me add one encouraging sentence. When I was going through God consciousness, I realized that I lost the attachment to everything else. I had no attachment to any more personal desires or even any of those actions which were self-centered. But that there was this huge attachment to Bhagavan, this divinity, and I could not fathom it, this huge attachment to Bhagavan. And then only later I understood that it was better to be attached to Bhagavan, and then that was what took me to the Brahmi Chetana, when that attachment to Bhagavan also left. This attachment to Bhagavan also left when the consciousness raised further and went to the Brahmi Chetana, the unity consciousness. So I want to leave you all with this one thought. It is better to be attached to something higher. It is better to be bound to something higher and give up the lower. And then when it is time, even everything, all bondage and all attachment leaves. Jai Gurudev, Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu.
ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। गीतामाहात्म्यम्